The atmosphere on Viridian Prime burned copper green as the human research vessel broke through the thick clouds. Cade Mercer gripped the safety harness of his seat, knuckles white, as the ship's systems blared warnings of atmospheric toxicity, levels far exceeding what their preliminary scans had indicated. What should have been a routine xenobiology expedition to catalog an emerging civilization had become a desperate fight against violent turbulence and failing ship systems. "We're going down," shouted Captain Alara, her voice steady despite the chaos. "Brace for emergency landing." The vessel carved through the dense air, stabilizers failing as they plummeted toward the surface of the alien world. Through the viewports, Cade glimpsed sprawling azure forests and glittering crystal structures before their trajectory sent them hurtling toward a vast clearing. The impact rattled Cade's bones. Equipment tore free from moorings, crashing around the cabin as emergency systems engaged. When the violent motion finally ceased, an eerie silence descended. "Status report," Alara commanded, blood trickling from a gash on her forehead. "Life support compromised," reported their engineer, Vox. "Hull integrity at 63%. Communications array destroyed." "So we're stranded," Cade said, unfastening his harness. "For now," Alara replied grimly. "Let's assess the damage and establish a perimeter." Outside, Viridian Prime revealed itself to be both beautiful and haunting. The air, though technically breathable according to their instruments, carried an acrid tang that stung Cade's nostrils. Crystal formations jutted from the earth like skeletal fingers reaching skyward, refracting sunlight into prismatic rainbows. Yet beneath the surface beauty, something was clearly wrong. The vegetation exhibited signs of cellular degradation, visible even to the naked eye. Withering leaves with peculiar lesions and phosphorescent decay spreading in circular patterns. "This ecosystem is collapsing," Cade murmured, taking samples and running preliminary analyses on his portable scanner. "Some kind of molecular breakdown affecting plant cellular structure." A rustle from the nearby forest edge drew their attention. Slender figures emerged, moving with deliberate caution. The Viridians stood nearly 7 feet tall, with luminescent skin that shifted patterns like liquid mercury. Their four-fingered hands held no weapons, but their posture conveyed wariness. The tallest stepped forward, angular features catching the light. "You come from beyond," it said, the translation matrix in Cade's earpiece converting the musical clicks and whistles into English. "We did not intend to crash on your world," Alara answered diplomatically. "Our ship was damaged entering your atmosphere." The Viridian, who later introduced himself as Nix Von, tilted his head. "The withering affects even the sky now. Nothing is untouched." His mercury silver eyes fixed on Cade, who was still scanning plant samples. "What does your device tell you, Star Traveler?" Cade hesitated before responding. "Your ecosystem is experiencing some kind of molecular breakdown. I'm not sure of the cause yet." Nix Von's skin rippled with dark patterns, an expression of grief they would later learn. "The withering consumes our world. For 3 cycles, it has spread. Our brightest minds seek answers but find none. The sacred springs turn toxic. The crystal forests crumble to dust. Soon, Viridian Prime will be barren." Cade's scientific curiosity ignited. "I'm a xenobiologist. May I examine your affected areas more closely? Perhaps an outside perspective might help." The alien's luminous eyes widened slightly. "You would assist us?" "We're stranded here anyway," Cade replied with a shrug. "Might as well make ourselves useful while we repair our ship." Little did Cade know that this simple offer of help would irrevocably change his life, and the fate of an entire civilization teetering on the brink of extinction. The central laboratory of Lumina City was unlike anything Cade had ever encountered. Vast crystal columns supported a dome of translucent material that shifted hues with the changing light. The Viridians worked with an elegant efficiency, their 6-fingered hands manipulating holographic displays and intricate instruments crafted from materials unknown to human science. Cade had been granted full access to their research on the withering, after just 2 weeks. The Viridian scientists, particularly the brilliant Eshla Ven, head researcher of ecological systems, recognized his unique perspective might be valuable. The pattern suggests an engineered pathogen, Cade said, examining the three-dimensional model hovering before them. But unlike anything I've seen before, it's almost like the molecular structure of your entire biosphere is being rewritten. Ashleven's skin rippled with patterns of deep concentration. We observed the progressive deterioration, but lacked context to understand its artificial nature. Your hypothesis changes everything. If it's engineered, there must be a purpose, Cade continued, manipulating the holographic display. And if there's purpose, there's logic. Logic we can potentially unravel. The Viridians exchanged looks of cautious hope. For the first time, since the withering began, they had a new approach. Over the following days, Cade worked tirelessly alongside Ashleven and her team. Captain Alara focused on repairing their ship with Vox, occasionally checking on Cade's progress. The Viridians proved to be remarkable allies. Their intuitive understanding of molecular resonance complemented Cade's analytical approach to biochemistry. The molecular signature contains embedded patterns, Cade announced one evening after nearly collapsing from exhaustion. Not random deterioration. It's systematic, like a conversion process. Ashleven's normally composed demeanor shifted, her skin flashing with startled recognition. Show me. Cade displayed his findings. The pathogen wasn't destroying the ecosystem, but transforming it into something else entirely. Something that would be hospitable to a different form of life. It's terraforming, Cade concluded. Someone is remaking your world, with complete disregard for your civilization. The revelation sent shockwaves through Viridian society. The Council of Elders convened an emergency session, requesting Cade's presence. The ancient chamber, carved from a single massive crystal, hummed with tension as Cade presented his theory. The pathogen contains markers suggesting it originated from the Pyrithian system, he explained, referencing stellar cartography the Viridians had shared. A species, there might be responsible. Elder Rixmorov, his ancient skin barely luminescent with age, leaned forward. We have no quarrel with the Pyrithians. We have had no contact with them for generations. You may not need contact for them to covet your world, Cade replied grimly. Its composition and position might be ideal for their needs. A murmur rippled through the council. Elder Tazloran, her patterns displaying concern, asked, "Can it be stopped?" Cade hesitated before responding. Possibly, but I need to understand more about the pathogen's functioning. And we need to work quickly. Based on my calculations, you have perhaps 2 months before the changes become irreversible. As the council session concluded, Cade found himself surrounded by Viridians reaching out to touch his shoulders, a gesture of profound gratitude in their culture. The contact left faint luminescent prints on his jacket that glowed softly in the dim light. That night, returning to his quarters, Cade noticed small offerings placed outside his door. Crystal formations, bioluminescent plants carefully preserved, in stasis fields, intricate metal sculptures that moved without apparent mechanism. They're thanking you, Ilara said, watching his confusion. You've given them something they'd lost. What's that? Cade asked. Hope, she replied simply. The sacred spring of Viridian Prime had once been the wellspring of all life on the planet. A vast underground lake shimmering with bioluminescent properties that, according to Viridian mythology, contained the essence of their world's creation. Now it lay tainted. Its once vibrant azure waters turned a sickly gray-green, the surrounding crystal formations dull and brittle. Our ancestors emerged from these waters, explained Ashleven as she led Cade through the massive cavern. Their footsteps echoed on the crystalline pathway spanning the lake's circumference. All life on Viridian Prime carries molecular memory of the spring. Cade nodded, his scanner capturing readings that made his brow furrow. The pathogen concentration is highest here. It's patient 0 for the planetary infection. A group of Viridian spiritual leaders known as the Luminaries watched Cade intently. Their ceremonial attire, composed of living crystal fragments that responded to their emotional states, glittered anxiously in the dim light. For them, allowing an alien To access their most sacred site was unprecedented, yet desperate times demanded desperate measures. The spring's molecular structure is unique, Cade muttered, more to himself than his companions. It's like a natural quantum computer, storing biological information for your entire ecosystem. Eschleven's skin flickered with surprise. You perceive this without instrumentation? Our scientists required generations to understand the spring's function. Cade smiled ruefully. Sometimes an outside perspective helps. What's remarkable is how precisely the pathogen targets this system. It's using your world's own biological communication network to spread itself. Chief Luminary Oravex, her ancient form barely luminescent with age, approached Cade. Can you commune with the spring, as we once did? Cade looked uncertain. I'm not sure what you mean. Before the withering, our luminaries could achieve consciousness resonance with the spring, Eschleven explained. They would immerse themselves and return with visions, guidance for our people. That's not really how human biology works, Cade replied apologetically. Oravex's expression remained serene. Perhaps not, yet you perceive things we cannot. The spring may speak to you differently. Against his better scientific judgment, Cade found himself considering it. His equipment had gathered all possible data, yet something elusive remained, something the instruments couldn't quantify. I'll need to adapt my protective gear, he said finally. Your biochemistry can handle direct exposure, but mine can't. 3 hours later, Cade stood at the edge of the sacred spring wearing a modified environmental suit integrated with Viridian technology. Captain Ilara had strongly objected to the plan, but ultimately recognized the necessity. Don't stay submerged. Longer than 5 minutes, she instructed over the comm. Any biological contamination could be catastrophic for you and potentially Earth if we ever make it back. Cade nodded, his heart pounding as he descended the crystal steps into the luminescent liquid. The sensation was strange, even through his suit. He felt an odd resonance like standing in a gentle electrical field. As he submerged completely, the world around him transformed. The liquid seemed to conduct his thoughts, amplifying and reflecting them back in patterns he couldn't fully comprehend but somehow understood intuitively. The pathogen's design unfolded before his consciousness, not as data points, but as intentions, purposes, origins. When he emerged 4 minutes later, gasping and disoriented, the Viridians rushed to assist him from the spring. I know who did this, Cade said, his voice hoarse, and I know how to stop it. Later, recovered in the council chamber, Cade explained his discovery. The Pyrithians didn't create this pathogen, they're its intended beneficiaries. It was designed by a rogue faction of their scientists who believe your world should be theirs. The pathogen is preparing Viridian Prime for Pyrithian colonization. Can we neutralize it? Asked Elder Rixmorov. Yes, Cade replied confidently. But we'll need to synthesize a counter-agent and distribute it through the spring itself. It will require materials from both your world and components from our ship. Captain Ilara's face hardened. Components we need for repairs, without which we may never return home, added Vox grimly. The chamber fell silent as the implications became clear. Saving Viridian Prime might mean stranding the humans permanently. Cade looked at his fellow crew members, then at the Viridians who had welcomed them. His decision had already been made. We need those components, he said firmly. Viridian Prime has one chance. We'll find another way home. The laboratory hummed with frenetic activity as Cade and Eschleven worked through their third consecutive night. Holographic models of molecular structures danced around them, each iteration bringing them closer to the counteragent that could save Viridian Prime. The binding sequence needs to target the pathogen's replication mechanism without disrupting your natural biology, Cade explained, manipulating a glowing strand of virtual molecules. It's like disarming a bomb wired into your planet's circulatory system. Captain Ilara entered the lab, her face drawn with concern. Vox needs to know exactly which components you're planning to cannibalize from our ship. Once removed, our chances of returning to Earth drop significantly. Cade's hands paused over the holographic interface. the quantum stabilizer, the resonance, array, and the molecular synthesizer, all essential for creating the counteragent. All essential for maintaining warp field integrity during interstellar travel, Ilara countered, her voice tight. You're asking the crew to potentially sacrifice their only way home. I know, Cade said quietly. I've told them they don't have to stay. The counteragent needs human biological markers to bond correctly. I can remain behind alone to finish. This. Ilara's expression softened slightly. You know that's not how we operate, Mercer. We're discussing options, not abandoning you. The crew votes in 1 hour. After she left, Eschleven's skin rippled with patterns Cade had learned to recognize. As concern, your people might choose to leave? They have families back home, people who love them. Lives they've built, Cade replied. I can't ask them to sacrifice all that. Yet you would sacrifice yours without hesitation, Eschleven observed. Cade smiled ruefully. My life back on Earth is simpler to leave behind. Besides, someone needs to see this through. An hour later, Captain Ilara returned with the entire crew. One by one, they placed component parts on the laboratory table, the very pieces needed from their ship. The vote was unanimous, Ilara said. We finish what we started. The gratitude of the Viridians manifested in luminous patterns that lit the city that night. Word spread of the human sacrifice, and soon the laboratory was flooded with offers of assistance, resources, technology, personal belongings with sentimental value. For a species that communicated as much through bioluminescence as through language, the message was unmistakable. The humans were now part of their collective light. With the ship components integrated into Viridian technology, the synthesis of the counteragent accelerated. Cade's theoretical model proved correct. The human biological markers provided the perfect carrier molecule to infiltrate the pathogen's structure and neutralize its terraforming function without harming the native ecosystem. It's ready, Cade announced finally, holding a container of luminous blue liquid. Now comes the hard part. We need to introduce it directly into the sacred spring and ensure it propagates throughout the entire planetary system. Elder Taz Loren, who had been observing their work, stepped forward. The luminaries have prepared the ritual of collective resonance. All Viridians will join consciousness harmony to guide the counteragent through our world's networks. Cade looked skeptical. With all due respect, Elder, we need to ensure even distribution through measurable scientific means. Perhaps, she replied with a ripple of amusement across her skin. On Viridian Prime, your science and our spiritual practices are not as separate as you believe. The procession to the sacred spring was unlike anything Cade had ever witnessed. Thousands of Viridians lined the crystal pathways, their skin glowing in synchronized patterns that pulsed like a single, massive organism. The luminaries led the way, chanting in harmonics that made the crystal formations resonate. At the spring's edge, Cade prepared to release the counteragent, his hands steady despite the weight of responsibility. Once I introduce this, there's no going back, he warned. If my calculations are wrong. Eschleven placed her hand gently on his shoulder. Then we face our fate together, but your light is true, Cade Mercer. We trust in it. With a deep breath, Cade released the counteragent into the sacred spring. The luminous blue liquid spread in spiraling patterns, interacting with the contaminated waters. For a tense moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then the entire spring pulsed with sudden blinding light. The luminaries began their ritual, their consciousness reaching out to guide the counteragent. Around them, every Viridian joined in collective meditation, their bioluminescence synchronizing in waves that rippled outward from the cavern. And amazingly, impossibly, Cade could feel it working. The molecular transmission of the counteragent carried on waves of what he could only describe as unified consciousness, spreading throughout Viridian Prime's interconnected ecological network. The transformation of Viridian Prime began slowly, then accelerated with breathtaking speed. Within days of introducing the counteragent, the sickly gray-green tinge receded from the sacred spring, returning to its natural azure luminescence. Crystal formations that had grown brittle and dull regained their translucency and structural integrity. The withering vegetation rejuvenated, unfurling new growth in vibrant blues and purples. Cade monitored the progress from multiple observation points established throughout the continent, scarcely believing the effectiveness of their solution. The counteragent isn't just neutralizing the pathogen, he explained to Captain Alara as they surveyed a recovering forest. It's actually using the pathogen's own distribution network to restore the original molecular patterns. You've given them their world back, Alara said, watching a group of young Viridians playing among newly revitalized crystal formations, their skin flickering with patterns of unbridled joy. We all did, Cade corrected, thinking of the ship. Components now permanently integrated into Viridian technology, their sacrifice made manifest. The crew had settled into a rhythm of life on this alien world, adapting to Viridian customs while sharing human knowledge and culture. Vox had become particularly adept at Viridian architectural principles, helping design new structures that incorporated both human and Viridian aesthetic elements. The rest of the crew found their own niches, teaching, learning, building connections. Yet for Cade, something had changed fundamentally. The Viridians had begun treating him differently, with a reverence that made him deeply uncomfortable. They called him Lightbringer in their language, a term once reserved for mythological figures from their ancient texts. They're starting to worship you, Alara observed one evening, as they watched Viridians place offerings outside Cade's quarters. Intricate crystal sculptures, bioluminescent plants arranged in patterns, handcrafted tokens infused with personal energy signatures. Cade grimaced. I've tried to explain that I'm just a scientist who happened to have a different perspective. Nothing special. To them, you're the alien who sacrificed his way home to save their entire world, Alara pointed out. That's practically the definition of divine intervention in most cultural mythologies. The situation intensified when a delegation of luminaries led by Auravex requested Cade's presence at a planetary alignment ceremony, an event that occurred once every 87 Viridian cycles. The 7 moons align tomorrow, Auravex explained, her ancient skin shimmering with ceremonial patterns. We wish for you to lead the ritual of gratitude. I'm honored, Cade replied carefully, but I'm not qualified to lead a Viridian spiritual ritual. You united science and spirit to save our world, she countered. The luminaries have consulted the spring. Your presence at the ceremony was foretold. Cade looked to Eshleven for support, but found her radiating patterns of agreement. The prophecies in our ancient texts describe a being from beyond the stars, who would restore the light when darkness threatened to consume us, she explained. Many believe you are the fulfillment of this prophecy. That's coincidence, Cade stammered. Or maybe your ancestors encountered other spacefaring species who helped them in the past. I'm just a human scientist. Auravex's skin rippled, with what Cade had learned to recognize as gentle amusement. Perhaps prophecy is simply pattern recognition across time. Does it matter if your coming was foretold by mystical vision or scientific probability? The outcome remains the same. You came when we needed you most. The ceremony itself was breathtaking. The 7 moons of Viridian Prime aligned in perfect conjunction, bathing the central crystal amphitheater in overlapping rays of refracted light. Thousands of Viridians gathered, their skin luminescence synchronized in waves that complemented the moonlight. Despite his misgivings, Cade found himself standing at the ceremonial focus point, dressed in robes woven with living crystal filaments that responded to his bioelectrical field, glowing softly against his human skin. I am not a god or a savior, he addressed the assembled Viridians. I am simply a visitor who found himself in a position to help. The real power was in your world all along, in your sacred spring, in your collective consciousness, in your willingness to trust an alien with your most precious resources. His words were translated and carried through the amphitheater, but Cade wasn't sure if his message was truly being received as intended. The patterns rippling through the crowd suggested reverence rather than understanding. Later that night, as the celebration continued throughout Lumina City, Cade sought out HFY. "I need your help to change how your people see me," he said, urgently. "This worship has to stop." HFY studied him thoughtfully, her luminescence pulsing with complex emotions. "Perhaps you misunderstand. The Viridians do not worship you as infallible or omnipotent. We recognize in you a light that mirrors our own, different in form but kindred in essence." "Is that so troubling?" Cade considered her words carefully. "Where I come from, being treated as something more than human usually leads to disappointment. I will fail. I will make mistakes. I'm afraid of what happens then." "Then you will fail and make mistakes, and we will learn together," she replied simply. "The light we celebrate in you is not your perfection, Cade Mercer, but your willingness to shine it upon others." 5 years passed on Viridian Prime. The ecosystem had not merely recovered but flourished beyond pre-withering levels. The counteragent, Cade had developed, continued to protect the biosphere, creating a more resilient version of the original molecular structures. The sacred spring now glowed with unprecedented brilliance, its quantum properties enhanced rather than diminished by its encounter with the pathogen. Cade had established a scientific academy where Viridians and the remaining humans collaborated, exchanging knowledge that benefited both species. Captain Alara served as ambassador to neighboring star systems, establishing Viridian Prime's presence in the wider galactic community. Vox had integrated human engineering principles with Viridian crystal technology, creating revolutionary new forms of sustainable energy. For his part, Cade had finally found peace with his role in Viridian society. He was still called Lightbringer by many, but he had learned to accept the title as symbolic rather than literal. The worship had gradually transformed into something more akin to deep respect, a mythos that inspired rather than constrained. He stood now on the observation platform above Lumina City, watching the triple sunset cast prismatic patterns through the crystal spires. HFY joined him, her luminescence harmonizing with the evening light. In the years of working together, their relationship had evolved into something unique, beyond friendship, but defined by neither human nor Viridian conventions. "The Pyrithian delegation arrives tomorrow," she remarked. "The first official diplomatic contact since we discovered their involvement in the withering." "Are you nervous?" Cade asked. "Curious," she corrected. "They claim the rogue scientists responsible have been held accountable. They seek to make amends." 5 years ago, I would have harbored resentment," Cade admitted. "Now I see an opportunity to prevent similar events elsewhere." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a young Viridian messenger, his skin pulsing with excitement. "Lightbringer, Ambassador Alara's ship has returned from the outer system. She brings visitors." Cade and HFY exchanged puzzled glances before following the messenger to the landing platform. There, beside Alara's familiar vessel, sat a ship of unmistakable human design, sleeker and more advanced than the research vessel that had crashed 5 years earlier, but unmistakably from Earth. "They picked up our distress beacon," Alara explained as she approached, her expression a complex mixture of emotions. "It took them 5 years to trace it this far into unexplored space." From the Earth vessel emerged a delegation of startled, human officials, clearly unprepared for the sight of their long-lost compatriots integrated into an alien civilization. Their leader, Admiral Reeves, stepped forward with barely concealed amazement. "Captain Alara Morgan," he said formally. "The United Earth Council declared your expedition lost 3 years ago. Finding you alive, and apparently thriving, is unprecedented." "Admiral," Alara replied with equal formality. "Allow me to welcome you to Viridian Prime and introduce our Chief Science Officer, Cade Mercer." The Admiral's eyes widened slightly as he took in Cade's appearance. The human scientist now wore semi-permanent luminescent markings in Viridian patterns, his clothing a hybrid of human and alien design. "Dr. Mercer," the Admiral acknowledged, "your reputation precedes you. The Viridians transmitted comprehensive data about your achievements here. Earth is eager to establish formal relations with this world, thanks largely to your unexpected diplomacy." The following days brought a whirlwind of negotiations and explanations. The Earth delegation offered passage home to any crew members who wished to return. To the Admiral's surprise, only 2 accepted. The rest, including Cade and Alara, had built lives too meaningful to abandon. You understand they consider you some kind of savior? Admiral Reeves asked Cade privately during a tour of the academy. Our xenoanthropologists are fascinated by the cultural impact of your presence here. I understand they've incorporated me into their cultural narrative, Cade replied carefully, just as they've been incorporated into mine. We saved each other, Admiral. On the final evening before the Earthship's departure, a grand celebration united humans from both vessels with the Viridians. Under the light of all 7 moons, now scattered across the night sky, Cade found himself seated beside Elder Rick Smoroff, now in the twilight of his long life. When you first arrived, I feared you might destroy what remained of our world through ignorance, the Elder admitted, his luminescence barely visible with age. Instead, you taught us that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected sources. Your people would have found a solution eventually, Cade replied modestly. Perhaps, the Elder acknowledged. But it would have been too late. Some gifts are measured in timing as much as substance. He gestured toward the gathering where humans and Viridians mingled freely, sharing stories and knowledge. Look at what your presence has wrought. Not merely a saved world, but a transformed one. Cade watched as Admiral Reeves listened intently to Eshleven explaining Viridian quantum physics, his initial diplomatic stiffness replaced by genuine scientific curiosity. Nearby, Earth scientists eagerly studied samples of crystal technology, while Viridian artisans incorporated elements of human aesthetic design into their works. We don't worship you for being perfect, Elder Rick Smoroff continued, seeming to read Cade's thoughts. We honor you for being exactly what you are, different from us, yet willing to sacrifice for us. In doing so, you taught us to see beyond ourselves. Later that night, standing alone beneath the stars, Cade reflected on the journey that had brought him here. The crashed ship that had once represented failure now stood preserved as a monument in the central plaza of Lumina City, a symbol of how apparent catastrophe could become salvation. He had arrived as a scientific observer, became a reluctant savior, and now existed as something between myth and man. Yet in saving this alien world, he had found something he never possessed on Earth. Purpose that transcended personal ambition, connection that defied biological differences, and home that existed not in a place, but in the light shared between diverse beings. The next morning, as the Earthship prepared for departure, Admiral Reeves presented Cade with an official communication device. The United Earth Council has appointed you as our first official ambassador to Viridian Prime, he explained. This will allow direct communication with Earth whenever you wish. Cade accepted the device with a smile. Thank you, Admiral. Please, tell them that Viridian Prime and Earth have more to offer each other than either yet realizes. As the Earth vessel rose into the copper-green atmosphere, Cade stood with Eshleven and the gathered Viridians, watching it become a distant point of light among the stars. He was no god, no perfect being, but simply a human who had found himself in extraordinary circumstances and chose to help. And sometimes, Cade reflected as the luminescence of thousands of grateful Viridians rippled around him like a living sea of light that was enough to change a world, and be changed by it in return. What happens now, Lightbringer? Asked a young Viridian child looking up at him with innocent curiosity. Cade smiled, placing his hand gently on the child's shoulder. Now, we continue to learn from each other. The light you see in me is just a reflection of your own. Remember, that long after I'm gone. But that day would be long in coming. For now there was a recovered world to explore, 2 civilizations to connect, and countless discoveries waiting beyond the next crystal horizon. The human had saved a dying world, and in doing so, had found his own salvation.